and I'll outline the plot line for you. Personally, I think it's way implausible and totally over the top, but who knows? Maybe someone would want to make this movie. Anyway, the plot starts in the late 1970s and the early 1980s, where members of the Chinese Communist Party in the post-Maoist era are looking over the history of the country since the People's Revolution and what happened in the country under Mao, and then the Chinese Cultural Revolution, and then the Gang of Four takeover, and what they learned from this and isolationism and President Nixon in the United States in the post-Vietnam War era, that they realized that the old way of doing things was probably not going to serve them well in the future. They were heading for more kind of Maoist, Little Red Book, Cultural Revolution type things. At the same time, too, there was also a strong sense of resentment among people in China regarding the relationship with the colonial powers, this being things like the Opium Wars and so on, the fall of the Han Empire. Coupled with all these things, in this imaginary plot, the Chinese begin infiltrating Western institutions in the early 80s with the eventual intention of invading and taking over the Western world as the supreme world power in a military and every other way. Now, so this begins with they arrive in Germany in the 1980s and they meet these people who are part of a new group called the Greens. And the Greens are an environmental movement started in Germany, and among their platform is the Deindustrialization of Germany and Europe, and things like the legalization of pedophilia and so on. The Chinese communists infiltrate these groups and give them large sums of money. But then when they see that the agenda is not going their way, they have the two leaders of the German Green Party murdered, and they make it look like a murder-suicide. And then they deliberately recruit over members of radical faction groups like the Red Army faction, Baader-Meinhof, and they dovetail them into the German Green movement and create a demilitant Marxist communist organization which operates under the umbrella and smokescreen of being an environmental new economy type political system for the future. They disseminate this idea into several countries. They start off by beginning with ecological and environmental things, stopping factories from polluting rivers and so on. And then they radically take them over and something else. They believe that the Chinese communist agents infuse within all the Western green movements, but particularly in Europe, the belief that we're living in a post-industrial age. And manufacturing is something that's dirty and degrading, and the future is in things like IT and the information technology. So as a result, Europe, North America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they all begin to slowly, through a cultural shift that disseminates from the establishment down into deindustrialization, and therefore losing their capacity for self-autonomy. But at the same time, too, they still need these products. And the Chinese communists say, well, we'll build them for you at bargain discount rates. We'll build you anything you want. Anything you want, we'll make it for you in China in our factories. And it will cost, your profits will be sensational. So as a result, it isn't so bad for all these companies that were heavily involved in industry in the United States and Europe and Canada and elsewhere. What they do is they move their factories to China, And the CEOs or the families who own these companies continue to rake in large amounts of money, more than they ever dreamed of, while they don't have to pay local workers and dealing with unions and so on and paying rent and renting infrastructure and all other charges in their own country. They just basically issue a catalogue. It's made in China and it's sold into Europe and into North America. So overnight, the Chinese communists have taken Europe and America and deindustrialized it because, well, industry is dirty. Then they say you have to make clean energy. And then they point at the power stations, and they tell activists over there who are working through the green movement that they must point at heavy coal gas power stations and tell them that they must be shut down because they're bad for the environment and they're polluting, and replace them with sustainable energy, which they do. And after a while, the Western powers and Western nations don't have any electrical power grid capacity because they've shut down all their dirty oil and coal stations and they put in windmills and things that don't produce enough capacity. So they've now lost their industrial capacity that they could to produce basically everything, and they've also lost their electrical power supply grid capacity, and it's all to protect the environment. Meanwhile, in mainland China, they build a power station every single week out of burns coal or oil. And they build massive high-speed rail systems because these high-speed rail systems require massive amounts of power. And they tell the same thing to Europeans. And the Green parties in Europe say, well, we will have all these fantastic, electric underground metros and light rail systems and all this stuff. In the end, all they get is a few cycle lanes. In fact, in one of the case studies, the Chinese operatives in Ireland, running the Green Party in Ireland, get them to make this big plan of having underground rail systems all over Dublin to relieve congestion, but in the end, all they get are cycle lanes and a few extra buses. And the city's as gridlocked as ever. And that was done all over Europe through the local Chinese Communist Green Party diplomatic attaché known as the local Green Party. But by this time it's spread further than just the Green Party. For example, a cultural change now has to take place. Western men have to be feminized. In order to do this, you need universities, scientists and so on to say that there's no such thing as genders, that men can have babies and periods. At the same time, back in China, you're banning boy bands and the Chinese communists are increasing activities, sports, training and military training. You get college professors and you flood Western universities with thousands upon thousands of attractive young Chinese female students. These Chinese female students play the little kind of innocent flower, lotus flower, and have affairs with these college professors in Western universities. Then one day a CD or a DVD or a USB card, a flash drive, arrives in his office, and there was a video of him having sex with the young Chinese exchange student. But that's not what really is. They've used high-end AI CGI to remove the Chinese young girl he was having sex with and replaced it with an underage boy. See, it's not that much of a leap to put a Western underage boy and to put it in their CGI in where the attractive, small, slight, petite Asian woman was, exchange student. And then they say to him, you will do whatever we want you to do and say. And the next thing you know, college professors are saying, there's no such thing as gender. Men can have babies and periods. There is no such thing as male or female. and her and zur, and all this mad gaslighting. And they're all doing it in tandem. So, while this is all going, the Chinese Communist Party are tooling up and building an enormous army. And they're doing it all without firing a shot. They are demolishing the Western ability to power itself, feed itself, manufacture for itself. This is called siege warfare. And now they begin the propaganda mind warfare. They go into the military and they do the same to generals. They blackmail and compromise them. And the next thing you know, you have Western armies filled with prancing guys wearing high heels. And the Chinese soldiers get tougher and tougher and tougher. Then something happens. A virus gets leaked from a laboratory in China. And Western politicians, who are now all compromised in one way or another, are working directly for the Chinese Communist Party, implement a worldwide pandemic where everybody's locked at home, terrified and afraid. This allows them to bring in a control system of vast databases, see how people are moving, and restrict their movements and so on. Something strange then happens. Large numbers of containers, in one case 250,000, arrive in California alone. They're seen at airports and in dock and terminal yards all over the world. And they're locked, and they all came from China, and nobody knows what's in them. And then you say, well, there's no way that Chinese troops could just march into the US and take over like in the movie Red Dawn. And of course you're right. But there are mercenaries. The President of the United States has believed that the southern border should be just opened up and allowed anyone to flood in. Many of these people will come from places where the West has treated them bad through a history of colonialism, Africa and so on. These people have their own little grudge against the West. The Chinese have been in places like Africa, building railways and roads and infrastructure, and trying to right all the wrongs created by the colonialists in order to win and curry favour with African regimes. All the time, millions and millions of people from Africa are flooding into America, North Europe, and so on. Then something happens. An order is given, and all these immigrants are suddenly allowed to go to these container depots and open them up. And lo and behold, what's in there? Vast numbers of weapons, field kits, dressings, even folded up infantry vehicles, motorcycles. Everything you need to stage a coup is inside those containers. Well, they open them up, and the next thing you know, your migrants are all carrying machine guns and causing chaos, rocket launchers the lot in your country, your army, your military force, in its red high heels and its fishnet stockings, can't defend itself at this front because it's everywhere. They've been training in places like Malmo and so on. Now they're everywhere. They know how to use rocket launchers, grenades. The ones from the Middle East have been suddenly flown over by Joe Biden, and the rest in planes know how to use the weapons. And you have chaos. And then all you need then are for Chinese troops to land in your country and implement order. And they kill off all the insurgents that they armed, and they say, we are now your new protectorate. And they knock on your door, and they want all your details and everything about you. And then suddenly, with almost no effort, the entire Western world is a Chinese colony, overseen by a Chinese military government, with local puppets and enforcers put in, almost like the TV series from the 80s, V, with Chinese instead of aliens. I know it's a far-fetched story, and 99% of what I just said could never possibly be true. But I'd be very interested to see, could we flesh out this into some kind of script we could sell. Of course, everything I've said is absurd and could never possibly happen. But I still think it's a neat idea for a movie. So if you think that's a good idea for a movie, or it's too stupid, or it's too out there, let me know, because I want to frame this properly, because I like wild, insane fiction. Thank you.